there is some legality involved in this matter, especially when the frame up of the execute account, the sovereign wealth fund, and how it will be disbursed as when they created this account. But eventually, the president has said, look, we must have a unified account. Give us a sense of exactly what connects all these accounts and the legality. Has there been any form of breach of law in the way these accounts have been run in the past years?
Well, I'm not sure that I know anybody who knows the structure of the accounts as we speak. We don't know how much we produce in petroleum. We don't know how much gets sold. And I suspect, I'm not sure anybody knows how much comes in. And you know, as a nation, as a country, we're very cavalier about numbers, about counting, and we don't want to count honestly. And when you don't want to count honestly, you end up with insolvency. But, you know, Mr. Rewane has pretty much explained it all. You know, you don't have this kind of failure that we're talking about without governance failures. And part of what we've also got to address is how those governance failures come about. But also, it's about the misuse of expressions. Given what we have been told, there has been no bailout. This is my understanding of the situation. Because we're told that the money came from the so-called bailout money came from the LNG dividend. The LNG dividend, in a system that is properly managed, should go into where? The Federation account. Money that goes into the Federation account is distributable. And it's distributable across the Federation, the federal government, and the states. That is what the law says. The Constitution is very clear on that, federal revenue. I believe that's Section 164 of the Constitution. So, if that is the situation, if this was LNG dividend, which is revenue accruable to the Federation account, then there's no question that this was not a bailout. But that say, and let me be very clear, I personally don't support the idea of the federal government bailing out states. The states should live and die by their financial prudence or lack of it. If the states choose to be irresponsible in the allocation or expenditure of their resources, I think they should face the consequences. If we choose to make the public sector the basis, the framework for our jobs strategy, so that you pack everybody, you know, your entire village and your ancestors and all the ghosts and what the Nigerians call mami water in your village into the public sector, and you want the country to bail you out. I'm sorry, that is not fiscal prudence. That's irresponsibility. That's compounding irresponsibility with more irresponsibility. So we've got to address the question, is it right for the federal government to be bailing out the states? I don't think it is. All right. I think I'm very clear about that. Okay. I don't think this has been a bailout. I think these were distributable funds that, in fact, were distributed, and that's okay.
All right. In terms of the nomenclature of what we're talking about, bailout or no bailout, maybe, just maybe, a federal government there gets about 52% of what comes into the country, and states and the local government and what have you will have to share the rest. Do you not think that the federal government will now becomes like the mother hen, should be responsible to get the states out of? You said that the states should live and die by what they earn, not necessarily being bailed out. Because this issue, you said, is not a bailout. But what exactly do you think it is? And you think that that action of giving those states those monies are illegal?
I don't think the states were given any money. I think these were funds that were earned due for the Federation account and distributed in accordance with the process of distributing money in the Federation account. And that is the way I understand it. That's the way I see it. Now, that's different from addressing the issue of the federal, allocation formula. Now, the allocation formula, yes, gives the states, the federal government about 52%. And you can argue that, the incidence of distribution of powers between the center and the states as the federation units under our federal system may well be a bit imbalanced or needs to be rebalanced. That's a question on which reasonable people can disagree. My issue is that, first of all, these funds that as far as I understand the law applicable to these issues, there's not been any bailout. Number two, as a matter of fiscal management, I don't think the federal government should be bailing states out who have been irresponsible in the management of their resources. If you look at, so many states have SPOs, standing payment orders, standing in the name of lots of banks for consumption, not investment. And you're asking the rest of the country to bail them out of decisions that were entirely imprudent, that even a blind person could have seen was imprudent. The question is, and this is the point, and Mr. Rewane used the expression, binging on money like drunken sailors. How do we ensure, after this is done, that we are not back in this position with the states behaving like drunken sailors? I've not seen anything to that effect, and I do think that's the bigger question we've got to address. All right.
Let me quickly come to Mr. Rewane now, because I saw you nodding, and at some point you were shaking your head at what Professor Odinkalu was saying. But the big question...
There is a bailout. Let me correct one thing. The point is that even if the money is due to you, is it due to you at this point in time? You know that a company is going to declare a dividend. It's only after the AGM and a dividend warrant has been sent to you that it becomes, value dated. So you cannot spend it in advance. What has happened is that these are dividends that are due from the LNG. It will come into the distributable pool, and it will be shared at the appropriate time. The states were already in negative state, and therefore the money that was coming, giving them money even before it is due for distribution, is a form of support. And that is what we call a bailout. And the bailout actually, at times, is to prevent a contagion. In the US, in 2008, we had what we call the Economic Stabilization Act to support the financial system, where $700 billion was allowed to be spent to support the Lehman Brothers and all the others, Bear Stearns, to ensure that the system doesn't fail. I like what Professor is saying, but in an ideal situation, people should be allowed to die and sink by their own sins. But the fact that it's going to spread a contagion, there are banks that have lent money to these states. There are people who have bought their bonds. So the consequences of allowing them go to the wall and collapse is not as easy as that. It's like Greece. This is about the 12th intervention in Greece, and they've come back to the same situation. So financial failure in a system where states are too big to fail, and they have links, right, and a contagious effect, then we have to stop. Now we need to stop them, and then we need to put in place steps that will stop them from falling into that kind of situation, give them conditionality.
A lot of the states are owing, locally and externally.
Yeah.
That's a big problem, isn't it?
And the intervention was at three levels. One was the $2.1 billion, which was the LNG tax and dividend. The second one was 300 billion naira given by the central bank. And then there was the 250 billion naira of soft loans from the banks, which were being extended. And when you put all of that together, it comes to almost 1 trillion naira. 1 trillion naira is 25% of the federal government's budget. Right? Coincidentally, it's about the same amount that the federal government uses for debt service. Coincidentally, it's slightly less than what we use for the subsidy. So what are you going to see? What you're going to see is this. Because the currency has been devalued, you are having a higher naira value because you multiply the dollars by 199 instead of 168. So they're getting some support there. If not for the devaluation, those states would have been gasping about 3 months ago, if not 6 months ago. Not only that, they get, because the subsidy amounts are being reduced, so the federal government is spending less on subsidy than it was. So the answer to this, first and foremost, is that you got to get rid of the subsidies system.
You mean subsidies need to be removed?
Immediately.
But you remember that, a lot of people who are in government around now were some of those who opposed subsidy removal.
No, if I know now, right? If I knew then what I know now, I would take a different position. All of those people are looking at queues. Coming to this place today, we saw people queuing up for petrol. This is a killer. And whether you like it or not, either you do it now or you do it later with consequences.
But will it not have a political blow on the country if subsidies are removed now?
No, you either remove subsidies and pay salaries,
or you leave it,
and owe salaries.
You were describing the state of the funds that are being released right now.
Yes.
You mean that those funds are not ripe enough to be released?
No, you see, in accounting, we have what we call prepayments. If you pay in advance, if I take 3 years rent in advance, yes, I've taken it into my account and I'm spending it, but it means that for the next 3 years, I won't get the rent. So if anything happens, the landlord, if he has used the 3 years rent to pay school fees of his children, then something happens to the house and the roof gets blown off, he will not have the money to go and even fix the roof. And that is the typical situation of Nigeria, because there's financial mismanagement, and there's financial recklessness, and then there's corruption.